3 of Bobcat PTG. Today we have a lot of cross-project meeting, and I was in discussion with Pranali and Sylvan, and we are going to have a cross-project session across all 3 projects. Uh, I don't remember the last time this happened. I wasn't there, at that time, but yeah, so we have slight change of schedule today. So first we are going to meet up with Glance. So Glance team is going to join us at 14:30 UTC, and we are going to have a half an hour session with them. Then there is a topic regarding an security fix on the Glance side. So I proposed a spec last cycle regarding introducing new location APIs. So there was this issue where when we were enabling multiple locations, then the image location was available like in the image get response, and it could lead to some security vulnerabilities. So we had a plan to fix that, but it requires efforts to be done on Cinder, Nova, and Glance, all 3 projects. That's why we are going to meet for that for half an hour. And after that, we are going to continue with the Cinder and Nova cross project. We have two topics for that. So basically from 14:30 to 16:30 UTC, we are going to be booked with Glance and Nova. And we don't have to go anywhere. They will be joining us. So that's the good news. We don't have to switch too many rooms. Okay, so let me get started with the first topic that I added. So it's regarding the OpenStack client update. And so we ended yesterday's PTG early, and I got a chance to attend the SDK meeting. So I gave a little update about Cinder to them. They also provided some guidance on the way forward as they had planned. So it's good that our plans are also aligned with them. So basically, I told them we are in parity with OpenStack client now. So all commands that exist in Cinder client are also in OpenStack client. We also have a link on the Etherpad if you can go through that and can check. Like, I think all commands are there if I didn't miss anything. So next, there are some steps that we can take to move forward this effort. One of them will be we can stop accepting changes in Cinder client now, the CLI side changes. So we won't be adding any new commands to Cinder client, and we can just directly add that client in OpenStack client. This will also require adding the Python bindings for the API call in Cinder client, because right now OpenStack client calls Cinder client and Cinder client calls Cinder API. So we will have to do this work, but that makes me bring to the second part where we will be improving the SDK support. So if we want to break this dependency with Cinder client, we can improve our SDK code so SDK could act as those Python bindings that does the API call. And Artem told me yesterday that they did significant improvements on the SDK side as well. So I will check again, but I think a lot of work has been done for the past 2 years, and a lot of commands are now available there. So even for the micro versions one, I checked, there was this directory with v3 which had some resource files which are only available with micro version, like group snapshots and groups. So I think there is a lot of work done on the SDK side, and gladly we won't have to do everything from scratch. But yeah, that seems to be the way forward, and the SDK team agrees that this is the right path to go to. Yeah, Brian.
I just have a question. So does the SDK use the Cinder client at all, or is it supposed to go directly to the API? So it's supposed to be a total replacement for the Cinder client?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not so much a replacement, but it is completely independent.
Okay.
It's like another implementation.
And then is the plan that the OpenStack client is going to eventually migrate to using only the SDK? I guess it doesn't matter. Who cares at this point?
Well, you have to kind of pick one in the OpenStack client. It's currently based on the Cinder client, and once the SDK reaches parity, I think the OpenStack client community would prefer we switch to using the SDK. Other projects have done that.
And then we would just delete the Cinder client.
Well, I think we probably need to provide the Cinder client for other purposes, but the OpenStack client would no longer be using it at all.
I think we had some use cases for standalone Cinder deployment. I'm not sure if people are still using it, but for that, we can still use Cinder client. But yeah, we will probably be deprecating it or maybe not. I'm not sure if deprecating it makes any difference or not. But yeah, I think we will be advising everyone to switch to OpenStack CLI now.
And then what's the status of the OS Brick Cinder client extension? Or do we know?
I haven't seen changes on that branch for quite some time.
Yeah, I guess it's work. As far as I know, Walt's the only person I'm aware of who ever actually uses that.
So what is the exact?
Ivan also used it, right? Didn't he?
Maybe, yeah. I'm not sure.
So what is the exact purpose of it? Like calling OS Brick methods like connect or disconnect volume? Is that okay?
The idea is to be able to do the attachment without Nova. So it simulates the Nova flow of gets the connector from where you're running the command, sends it to Cinder to create. I don't know if it has been updated to use the attachment mechanism or if it still uses the initialize and terminate connection. Then with the connection information, it gets back, calls OS break, and that's the attachment. It is, if you think about it, it is a convenient command to debug things. Because if you're having problems with Nova or in a specific node, you can run this command and even PDB things in there.
Okay.
I don't think the original idea was debugging. I think they had some other reason to do it, but it is also possible to do that. This could also be useful.
After Tempest,
Walter just joined. So.
We'll put like some additional load on QAD1 region, and also we'll have a focus.
I think Walt may be in 2 meetings.
Yeah, could be hours.
Well, another reason why this could be useful, just thinking from the top of my head, is, for example, if you have a backup solution that you want to connect to volumes, and you don't want to create a specific VM in Nova to do it. So if you have a volume you want to back up in a completely different location or whatever, you can clone it, connect to the clone, attach it, and you'll have access to the data locally. Well, locally, yeah, in a local device. That could also be another use
whatever Nova can do with the volume, we can use this client to emulate the same behavior, kind of.
We used to be able to do the same. Now I don't know if it allows you to do the two different attach mechanisms that we have. Because you remember we changed the way we do attaches, and now we have the attachment records. So I don't know if it was updated to support that or not. We would have to check it.
Okay. Yeah, we can mark it as an action item if anybody would like to go through that route. But yeah, for the OpenStack client work or the SDK work, I hope I was able to communicate the vision forward. So if anyone has any doubts regarding that.
So what did I miss with respect to the Cinder client extension? Sorry.
We were just discussing use cases of it, like who exactly right now do we use it actively, and what is the use cases, and also does it use the new or old attachment flow? These points.
Okay. I think it's primarily used by customers to attach volumes inside of bare metal instances. That was my remembrance of purpose of it.
So if we remove CLI support from the Cinder client, that's going to be a problem if the OpenStack client doesn't support it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a major hole.
I guess we could still not add any new stuff to the Cinder client CLI for now. So we could adopt that policy just so that we don't get out of sync with the OSC again, and then sort of defer what we're going to do about this.
We write extensions to the OSC to add this support?
I guess. I don't know what their mechanism's like, whether we could do that or not.
Okay. You know who's in charge of it? Is it still being actively developed? And
Yeah, Rajat merged a bunch of stuff to get Cinder client up to parity with it. I mean,
wow.
The other way around. So OSC and Cinder client from the CLI perspective are roughly, I guess more than roughly, on par. They're pretty close.
And with all the micro version support too?
Yeah, I think.
Wow, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So the commands are there, but there might be parameters missing. While working on it along the way, fixed some parameters. I added some parameters to the command line, and I also posted some bugs, like reported some bugs in OSC for some behavior change. But on a higher level, all the commands that exist in Cinder client now also are there in OSC. And now we are trying to work towards SDK. So because we still have to keep all the Python bindings in Cinder client. So now we'll be focusing on SDK to have the same support.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's just us and glance that is remaining. other projects have already done, I think, that work. So it's high time.
So, along the lines of that question, I don't mean to hijack everything, I guess, but does that mean that the OpenStack SDK is also at a parity, or are all of these changes inside just OSC itself?
Right now, I only worked on the OpenStack client. So
Okay.
a lot of work was done regarding microversions and all, but there were around 8 commands missing, which I added to OSC. But it still uses the Cinder, like it calls Cinder client for the API calls. So we still have to check all the missing commands in SDK and then add them, then update OpenStack client to use the SDK instead of Cinder client. So that work is remaining, and we are targeting for the future releases.
Okay. All right. I do a lot of custom apps which are based upon actually the Cinder client code base right now. And if all of that capability is not in the SDK, then I guess I will just continue to use the OpenStack client for my library, if you will, to talk to Cinder.
Okay, I was expecting a lot of discussion, but I think everyone is in sync and agrees with the way forward.
Well, it helps that you did all the work. So.
Not really. Stephen did majority of it, but yeah, I did just give the finishing touch. So just writing out the action item. I think we will still have time because last I saw glance is missing too many commands from OSC, and until all projects do this work, then we can't suggest people to just use OpenStack client. So yeah, but I will check the details. And so in case of SDK, they don't have a fancy document where they point out all the missing commands. For OpenStack client, it was easy, but this will require some manual work.
So do we want to say, what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is this: I think you're making a good point that we should commit to only doing no more CLI changes to Cinder client. So we'll have to do the CLI changes will only be done in the OpenStack client from now, although we still do have to do Cinder client class changes to support the stuff that would go into OpenStack client. I'm thinking the SDK stuff should just be, we should state clearly it's just a best effort, that if people have time, we'll work on the SDK stuff, because they do have the API, and so it's possible if somebody's really super motivated to just work on that independently. But I don't know that we as a project team, well, I personally don't want to leave the impression that we're going to go work on the SDK, although maybe other people are. I'll just speak for myself. I think we'll have our hands full with the Cinder client.
So I was planning to do some work there, but yeah, if someone is also motivated enough and want to support all that, then I'm all open for help. But yeah, while talking to Artem yesterday, I think we have made a lot of progress there because he was very optimistic that the interns did a very great job on SDK and OSC. So I'm hopeful I won't find work items spanning across multiple cycles. So
That's good.
yeah, so I think we are pretty clear on this topic. And I have some other topics that are planned for Friday, but I think we can discuss now since we still have time for glance cross project. And after that, yeah, it will be a busy schedule, a lot of topics for the cross project. But till then, I think we can discuss our topics to lighter the agenda of Friday. So So we have quotas, and yeah, we don't have much specific information about this, but I think it's good to discuss this effort. So I will just update the channel. So Kolka, would you like to tell about it, or should I do it?
Well, yeah, I can give a quick update, which is basically I haven't done anything for a while in the quota effort. I'm not going to go into the whole history of what I tried to do and why it took longer and how the database changes we made delayed me even more with fixing code and all that. Basically, I have been pulled to other things, and I don't think I will be able to work on the quota code for a long, long time. So Rajat offered to work on it instead. So we will be at some point be meeting, and I will be doing the handover of what I have, going over the spec, and going about with the latest code I have, explaining what it does and what I was trying to do, so he can try to pick it up and actually finish the work.
I'm not really sure if about the whole work, but yeah, definitely I can give it a try.
Yeah, one of the problems with the work is that conceptually it seems like it is possible to split it into multiple things. For example, there are two drivers, so it seems like, oh, you can first write one driver and then the other. Sure, if you are very, very good and you're able to think the interface for the drivers beforehand. But each of the drivers have different requirements. It's different, the dynamic one that just counting from the other one that actually increases. They had some small differences. So from what I was seeing, if I tried to first develop one and then start with the other. But as I was working on it, I realized that probably I could write one driver, and then when that got merged or I finished that one and started working on the other one, I would notice that the interface was not good enough. And then I would have to go back and change the original interface. So I'm not sure. What I'm trying to say with this is that I'm not entirely sure if it is possible to easily separate the effort and split it into smaller work that different people can do. It is possible to divide it so that reviews are smaller and more concise. But I think whoever is going to work on this will probably have to do the whole thing.
Can you refresh us?
Not trying to scare you, Rayat. Not trying to scare you, by the way, Rayat.
Can you refresh us on, so the two drivers, if I remember correctly, one will still use tables because we couldn't guarantee the database performance, and the other driver would be dynamic and just always be doing the counting dynamically, so it would always be up to date.
Okay. Correct. The difference with the static one from what we have today is that we would be simplifying it, because the quota system that we have was inherited from Nova, and Nova is more complicated in this regard than Cinder, because they had to get a lot of different resources before they can create a VM. So they have to get networking, they have to get the right host, they have to get volumes from Cinder, they had to reserve a lot of things. In Cinder, it's a lot easier in general. So what the new approach would do, even if it is using database tables, would be to remove the whole concept of reservations. That would greatly simplify things and help try to keep everything in sync. So what we would be doing is changing a little bit how quotas work. And instead of working like they do today, where you start creating a volume, for example, it goes through the API, creates the volume record in the database, but at that point, the quota is still not committed, as in the quota stays the same. It's at a later stage, for example, in the scheduler, when we say, okay, let's reserve for this. The new idea is basically to try to write the object in the database, and as soon as you write it, commit your quota. So even if you have a volume that has no data in the backend, it will be counted towards your quota. So all the volumes that end up in an error state would be counted for in size and in number of volumes. It's not great for people that are used to the old behavior, but I don't think it's a terrible idea to force people in a way to tidy things up so that they don't end up with 100 volumes in error state because, they don't use quota, they are just in error. So in the new mechanisms, they would have to clean those up with a delete operation for the quota to be released, even when no data is being used in the storage system. Is that more or less clear?
Yeah, and I guess that makes sense because from the standpoint of the end user, right? Even though, I mean, you've committed to, a 10 gig volume that's in error state, you don't know that there's no actual space out there. So you do need to delete it.
Yeah, and the thing is that it gets tricky if we want to have code that it's able to resync things. It's tricky to look at a volume record that it's in error state and know, is there actually data in the backend or is there no data in the backend? Because a record, a volume record that has no host, it's easy. There is no data in there because nobody has picked it up. But as soon as you write the contents of the host that it's, or the cluster that it's going to handle that volume, as soon as the scheduler sets that field, we have no idea if there is data or there is no data. So when you try to have a code that resyncs your quotas, it's going to mess things up, probably, because it doesn't know how to count out those kind of volumes. So yeah, I think this is going to be better.
Ulfa, sorry if I missed out some part of the explanation, but the reservations we had was for operations that might fail afterwards, and we would have to revert the whole quota thing. So, like, if we take example of a retype, then if we commit to the new host, which will be having the volume after migration, and we release the quota from the existing host, so we create reservations for the new host, right? In this case, like this host will be...
And negative reservations for the old one, I believe we also do.
Okay. So how would we handle this case in this system? Like you were saying, we will remove the concept of reservations, and we can just commit the quota in the beginning.
You will. Yeah. So I think I could be wrong, but I think I wrote this in one of the spec updates. Who knows if I even push it upstream or if it's still local. But the idea is that because you don't know if you're going to succeed or not, while the migration is ongoing, you are keeping both both quota. Because you have to make sure that, so if it's 1 gigabyte, you say in the source it was 1 gigabyte. Now I'm moving it to somewhere else. Okay, then in the new location, I need 1 gigabyte to be available and to be not reserved, to be committed for me. I'm going to be using that. But what happens if the migration fails? I delete the volume I was creating there and I go back to the old one. If I release it as soon as I start the migration and somebody else writes a new volume, they could be using the gigabytes that I need to go back and revert the original operation. So while the operation is ongoing, you are committing the quota to both locations, to the source and to a destination backend. And once you complete, you clean one of those up.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, one that it's a bit trickier, if I remember correctly, is the resize. But there was also I wrote somewhere how it would be behaving, because the resize, it's also a bit tricky, or slightly different than the other things. There were like 3 operations that were a bit weird. The migration, retype, not migration, the retype, the resize, and I think there was another one that was a bit special. And the idea is, in some cases, is to, I think, the code, what was trying to use is leverage our version objects so that when you create a version object, it would automatically commit the quota for you. That way, at a higher level, in the API scheduler volume, we would be decreasing the amount of code we had. Because right now, one of the problems we have is that our quota code is all over the place. And I'm not talking about single lines of commit. No, I'm talking about 60 lines of code in the middle of the manager just to do the commit rollback, reserve, commit, rollback, try, accept clauses and everything, and which has a lot of drawbacks. First of all, the code is harder to read because you have all the quota code mixed with the logic, with the application logic. And second, if you make a mistake over there, your quota is out of sync, which has happened a lot in the past. Another problem that we currently have with the reservation system is that we don't store in the database for the reservation the owner of that reservation. So what we're doing is passing in memory the operation we're doing with the ID of the reservation. What happens is that if you kill the service, you lost that reference or that mapping of this resource with this reservation. You lose it. And that means that when you start the service, you will probably mess things up with the quotas and the reservations and everything.
These problems are very similar to the issue that I discovered when trying to resolve all of the capacity allocation tracking that we do. And I still have a a review up in Garrett to resolve the migration problem. And it's something that we have had in production for a while now. But the problem that you just discussed with respect to migrating a volume and this window of time in which, you know, this volume has been chosen to go to another place by the scheduler, but that new destination has not been decremented correctly in memory when the migration starts. And then what happens when you fail a migration, making sure all the accounting on the source and the destination are accurate. Because I was running into a lot of problems with overcommits on data stores where we use thick provisioning everywhere. And we are getting over provisioned on thick provisioning because this accounting was not being done. And I could see the quota system having the same problem, basically.
Yep. Yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, and you see all those problems in your deployments because you migrate a lot of volumes from one place to another. So you need very good accounting and nothing kind of what we have now, which is eventual consistency in the tracking of the usage. You want it to be synchronous, that data, so that you always have it.
Yeah, that was a big problem for us. It's gotten a lot better with these patches that I have in place, but I wasn't aware that the quota had the same problems. But as you're describing, I'm like, oh, that's exactly the same problem we had with allocated capacity tracking.
Yeah, similar, yeah. So that's basically the situation. The TLDR is, hey, I'm passing the hot potato to Rayat, and he will be doing the quotas now.
I will try. But yeah, basically this was an important work item, so yeah, I thought I could give it a try. I think we have a similar kind of problem while deploying multiple schedulers, right? Because we pass all the capabilities information through RPC to scheduler from the volume service, and usually schedulers get out of sync because that information doesn't persist in the database.
Well, it's different. When we have multiple schedulers, the problem is that the data that you get from the volumes, it's fine. It gets synchronized in them all. But the operation that each one of them do are not notified to the others. So they decrease it locally, but the other 2 or 3 or whatever, they don't know that that one has decreased. So there are multiple ways to solve it. The easiest one, I think it's the one Walter went with, which is just have one scheduler. It's a service that it's very fast to come back up. It's performant enough for a big cloud like his. So that's the way to make sure that everything is in sync. Right, Walter?
Yeah, that's very true. We have one scheduler, multiple API pods, and multiple volume services, but one scheduler.
Because the solution would be for each of the schedulers, whenever it decreases something in memory, for it to send a broadcast to the others, telling them, hey, I've done this thing, and the others to update their local copies. That's a bit, well, it can be done, but then it sounds like we are not applying. If we go that way, we might as well revisit the whole approach of having things in memory and keeping track this way, instead of having, for example, a different main cache or whatever to store in a single location the values. So
yeah, and I would say Memcache is not a good solution either. We're getting rid of Memcache for our locking mechanism within Cinder because of all the problems. One, I don't want to sidetrack, but one network blip and everything just kind of falls apart. And when we have a lot of networking problems because our deployment is so complicated.
And I'm interested in the topic. Just one quick question. Do you know if the problem with the locking is based on queues not being resilient and not giving enough time, or if it's a problem inherent to Memcache that even if you change queues driver and made it more resilient, you would still have that same problem?
Some of the twos drivers are not the same as others. I think the Memcache driver doesn't do retries at all. So we opted to bail from that entirely and go with an NFS file lock and mount that everywhere.
And how is the database file lock going? It's functioning fine?
We didn't do a database file lock.
Oh. Okay.
You said NFS?
We're using NFS file locks. Yeah, we have a directory mounted and all of the locks go to files in an NFS shared directory.
Good to know.
If someone would write a retry mechanism on the Memcache tools driver, then I think that would help resolve some of the Memcache issues that we have, because in a Kubernetes environment like we have, everything goes up and down all the time. When we're redeploying things, we're upgrading things because the latest version of Memcache. Well, when you do that, then anything that relies upon it is in a bad state until everything kind of gets back up. And unfortunately for Cinder, over the course of time, it collects all these locks that it can't resolve anymore. And so we see just tons and tons of log entries on these locks that it can't deal with anymore. Anyway.
Thanks.
Basically, what I understand is that the dynamic counting mechanism is totally new. We will need to implement it from scratch. And yeah, we can do that. And for the static counting, we want to simplify it, but we need to be careful because it is interlocked with all the resource, like all the code.
No, sorry, I probably explained it wrong. So doesn't matter what driver, we have to throw away basically everywhere in the code that we have quota stuff, because we don't want the application level to care about quotas. You cannot interlace, I care about quota in this line. Next line is, oh, let me call the driver to do something. Then again quota, then again something driver. It's a mess. And it makes it so hard to read some of our functions because on 80 lines of code, I think I mentioned somewhere in the spec,
In
some
the
of
transfers code, yeah.
yeah, some of the function came from 90 lines to 10 lines, something like that, because everything else was quota code. So regardless of the driver, that is going to happen. The idea is to rip off everything related to quota at the manager level. Not, if possible, nothing. Worst case, just have a context manager call in there or a decorator. That's it, nothing more. And then we have two drivers, the dynamic and the other one. And both of them should have the same interface because we want to abstract it. And because they are slightly different on things they need to do, the interface, because it has to adapt to both of them, needs to be well thought. And sometimes, because there are too many operations in Cinder, it is very hard to just sit in front of the code and magically write the perfect interface on the first try. So until you go and start implementing things and going through the different operations and using the specific quota driver, you don't find out that your interface is lacking. Oh, I thought this was enough, but now I need it at this point to do this thing. And I don't have, the interface does not allow it. And that's what I found when we decided that we wanted to do two drivers. I found out that the original interface that was good enough for the dynamic counting, it was insufficient for the one that uses the database. So that's why I say it's not easy to split it, because if you just do the dynamic first, you will notice that you probably miss some stuff in your interface.
Okay. Yeah, irrespective of the driver we are going to implement, we still have to do all the cleanup.
Yeah, and the idea is to use context manager, decorators, and pass as much as possible of the quota to the version objects, which today, when you write code in Cinder, a lot of the code ignores everything about version objects. In some places, we don't care if it's a version object, it's an ORM instance, you don't care. It's just an object with values and a save method or a delete method. That's good. So the idea is to have something like that when you save, or for example, or you create, it automatically does quota for you. You don't have to worry. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of sounds good. Yeah, I've seen several try except blocks for just the quota management regarding, yeah, so okay. Then I can add an action item for myself here.
Well, that would be for you and me, basically. It's to do the handover, because I cannot just dump this monster to you and say, hey, go figure it out. Yeah, you would kill me. next time
We should
meet.
probably add another action item for all the current cores to reread the spec so that everybody's familiar with it when it's time to start reviewing.
Yeah, it's just around 2000 lines of spec.
Yeah, so if you start reading now, there's no excuse at M2.
Well, I think it's better not to start reading it now and wait until I do the handover to Rajat, because he will probably say, hey, this thing you're telling me, it's not in the spec. So we will probably update it again with things that I missed on it. Maybe it's not just more lines of a spec, but changing things.
Yeah, initially I had to do 3-4 reads of it, and it takes quite a lot of time. So I agree with Gurka, like it would save some effort of reviewers to just review the final version. I think we are pretty clear, at least I am somewhat clear on this. So, but yeah, if anyone has more questions about quotas, then yeah, I don't think. So yeah, enough quota for today. Then we can move to the next topic. So Naheem reached out to me like he would like to discuss a topic, and yeah, it seems more interesting than what I proposed. So yeah, we will be discussing that. Naeem, if you're around, you can start with it.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Raja. It's basically a quick discussion about a customer request. I asked Raja to include the topic if possible. Let me just paste a few notes I have here. It will make easier the discussion. Now it's better. So basically, what we need to understand, we have a customer that that is trying to migrate from Solidifier to OnTap, and they are using Active in Cinder with Solidifier, but OnTap still doesn't have this, and they are migrating and need the support to Active, and for some reason they want to do this with NFS protocol. So we were investigating how this would be possible to be implemented in the NetApp driver. And we saw that apparently no NFS driver has this implementation for Active. And the question we are having is it doable? Has someone tried this in the past? Is there some reason why Active is only implemented with iSCSI protocols for other drivers? That's the point. We just want to understand better if there's any problem doing this with NFS and or if there is any known issue that you might be aware of. So that's basically it. It's I don't know what are your thoughts about that.
I'm no expert on NFS, so I cannot tell you about the protocol itself. If there are any
But you're the
limitations.
expert on active-active.
Yep, that's why I was thinking. No, I can give some perspective from the active-active part, and I will let others give maybe additional possible drawbacks or pain points or things you have to look out. Probably Eric, as I talk, will come up with things. So from the driver perspective, the worst case that can usually happen is that you need to use a big fat lock that locks a bunch of code and says, I'm the only one doing this, and that makes things slower. That's, in general, the worst case scenario. The tricky part is figuring out where to put your locks. Basically, you don't want two different nodes acting probably on the same resource, or I don't know if your driver, for example, I don't know if you'd look at the document I wrote in the developers reference documentation for Cinder. There is a bit of explanation on the different type of locks, when to use each lock. So one thing that can usually happens when you're moving from active passive to active active is that you look at the locks that you currently have, and if you think that that specific lock is trying to prevent two operations from acting on a storage array resource, let's say you have a concept of host, and right now because you can have two operations doing the same thing, and they can act on the same host in the backend. You say, okay, I want only one to try to create the host or try to destroy the host to avoid race conditions. That is something, because the resource is on the storage array, that you would want to extend to another active node. So you would have to change that type of lock to a DLM lock, which is across all your services. But if, for example, it's a different sort of lock, something that you only need to guard against in the current node, then you would use a file lock, because the different backup service, the different services, Cinder services running on the same host, will use the same file lock location, so it will be safe. Finally, you have a third kind of lock, which is per process lock. So for example, if you're loading a library, a C library, and the library itself has a restriction that you cannot concurrently call methods, then you would use a per process locking that could make sure that you don't have two different threads calling the same one. But if it's fine to have a different process calling it, then that's your lock. So in general, what I'm trying to say is that probably there are no issues that it is possible to achieve it. It's all about figuring out where to lock and what are your critical code section that cannot happen concurrently. And here is where somebody needs a specific driver knowledge of the storage array plus a specific NFS knowledge to determine when that is the case.
Okay, thanks. So what I understand that is that apparently it's doable, right? there is no blocking in trying to do that. Okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
there should not be anything blocking, because in general, most of Cinder is at a management level. So it's about calls to a storage array. So as long as you handle those correctly and you don't do anything crazy, it should be doable. Yes.
okay.
Yeah,
Thank
not
you.
to make a joke of it, but it's doable, but someone's got to do it.
Yeah. Do we need a spec, write a spec for this, or only a blueprint is enough? What do you think?
I think there's no need for a spec, because you just need to adapt your driver to support this. I could be wrong, but I think no spec, no blueprint is fine if you have multiple patches or whatever, and you want to have an easy way to follow the work. But
Yep.
in general, for this kind of features, I don't think anything is needed.
Yep. I am asking just because I looked at the code quickly, and I saw that NetApp NFS driver has many things in common with the generic driver, if I'm not wrong. So I'm not sure if we will need to change something in the generic driver, or if we can do everything in the NetApp driver. I'm not sure about that yet.
Well, the important part is, let's say, you may be able to add this feature because, like you say, it's based on the vanilla NFS driver. You may say, hey, the locations where I need the logs are all in the NFS driver, in the vanilla NFS driver. So you end up adding support for active-active also to a driver. That is one possibility. The other one is that you just, because the right locations are only in your driver, you only add it to your driver. And in this case, you would add the class attribute saying active-active is supported only on your driver. And you would also have to make sure that the vanilla driver is not worse off after you're changing than before. What I mean with this is that if you make changes to a vanilla driver and it keeps working the same way when it's not running active-active because it doesn't support it, then it's fine. But if your changes to a vanilla driver make it run slower or fail somewhere, then it's a no-go in that approach, in that specific approach.
I would guess that the easiest way to do this would be to do the changes not in the generic driver and to do them in the NetApp driver. Because if you do them in the generic driver, there's a whole lot more stuff that has to be figured out with assisted snapshots that interact with Nova and things that don't apply to the NetApp driver.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you try to do it in the base generic NFS driver, I think you're going to have to solve a lot of problems that you probably don't really have an interest in solving.
Okay, got it. So I think that's all for me. Felipe is on the call, I think. Don't know if he has some question or anything, but
no, I don't.
Yep.
I'm fine with the answer.
Yeah,
thank you,
Naheem. Just one comment on, well, a reminder that setting the active-active flag on a driver, we run on our system. So if the vendor says that it supports it, we believe you. So you don't need to show us a bunch of tests in parallel or any output to confirm that it is supported. We assume that you have the knowledge in the ability to actually confirm that it is going to work in active-active.
Okay, understand.
That's a good point. That came to my mind when I was searching this. Do you have any kind of temp testing this kind of feature, like testing
Well,
parallelization?
the thing is, if you deploy your driver in active-active with 3 volume services and you run Tempest and it works, it is not an active-active exclusive testing, but it proves that the bare minimum runs fine, because if Tempest is running concurrently and not serially in the request, then different requests will go to different volume services because they run in a round robin fashion. So if there are 3 create volume requests to the same backend, one will go to each of the backends each of your services.
But Tempest may not generate enough of a load to trigger the system problems that active-active needs to solve. You might need to do like a browbeat type of, beat on the service hard to verify that, you've created all of the conditions that require the special locks needed for active-active.
Nice.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you everybody for the discussion. It helped a lot.
I'm not sure, but you may also need to look into if you need changes in NFS mount options and configuration for any NFS protocol level behavior for this. I'm not sure off the top of my head if you would or not. It'd be something to consider outside of just the driver code.
Okay, got it.
Hey, here's a thought back to Walt's comment about using NFS file locks for a lock manager. You'll need a distributed lock manager for active-active, and if you've already got NFS in the equation, wondering if that would be an interesting way of kind of combining the two features.
Yeah, if you already have NFS around, then why not? You can just create a new share for those kinds of specific types of locks or a different directory or whatnot, where you specify the locks for active-active versus your volume locks. But yeah.
Then I suppose the NFS team, so the NetApp team will be looking into implementing this for their specific NetApp NFS driver, not the generic one. And yeah, that would be better as well to not introduce any new regression, because now Dell also uses the generic NFS, and we don't want to create problems everywhere. So
Yep.
okay.
And we're going to try to implement this maybe during this Bobcat release. I'm not wrong.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, I think you will need to do this before milestone 3, which is the feature freeze, and this is considered as a feature. So
Sure.
okay. Yeah, as far as spec goes, I don't think we need that because active actor support already exists in Cinder and it's just a driver feature. We don't generally do specs for driver features, but some documentation around it would be really good in the NetApp docs.
Yep.
If there are some
I agree.
Okay. Okay, then we have around 10-15 minutes before the Glance Cross project, so maybe we can take a short break and be back at 14:30 UTC. So
Sounds good.
Thank you, everybody,
we
again.
reconvene here, right? Yet?
yeah, the Glance and Nova team will be joining here, so we won't have to go throughout today's PTG anyway.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay. See ya.